Hey vinyl community, it's Mazzy here, and 21 guitars, 21 guitarists, more or less. Now, this is influenced and inspired by a thread that I think was started by Richard McCook in the UK. Also Psych in the Valley did it, and Baggy Hi-Fi. Baggy Hi-Fi is new for me, fairly new, under 100 subs. So I'll put a link down, and I think you should get into his channel. Very nice style, very calming, relaxing presentations, and just great music. So someone else for you to view. Mazzy says so. So yeah, showing videos and lists of guitar players is something not new, but this is something just kind of that came about again during this whole stay-at-home thing. So I've never done one of these, at least on the video, so I thought I'd jump in. And of course, these to me are inspired by these three, maybe more, that I've missed, UK presenters. And like all fucking American appropriation, of course it goes both ways too, right? Because all the British guitar gods of the 60s and 70s, a lot of them were inspired by American blues players, but you know how the Americans take these British crime dramas and crime shows and great European TV shows, and we just screw them up when we present them here, and we water them down. I'm gonna water up. I'm going 21 guitar players. Now, there might be one or more because there's a few overlapping things here. This is supposed to be your favorite, and these are my favorite. So a lot of the, it's not a best of list, and that's so subjective anyway, but a lot of the, you know, best of thing, it's so subjective. So these are my favorites, 21 across of several genres. While we're going here, I'm playing in the background Beatle Connection, I Want to Hold Your Hand by Grant Green, the great jazz guitar player who happens to be in my list here. So without further ado, I'm showing several albums by a couple of these artists just because. So, no particular order is the great Chet Atkins, one of the great guitar players of all time. American, kind of in roots in country, kind of a jazzy country thing. Amazing guitar player. This is one of his early sort of teen beat albums, and it's kind of a fun, frolicky thing with the kids of the day in the 50s. But he made so many great records and so many wonderful records. This is an incredible album. This was reissued some years ago, and if you find this is My Brother Sings, and his brother sings on this. It's got a very country, wonderful feeling, and of course the great Chet Atkins country gentleman guitar. Love that beautiful guitar. Anyway, on RCA stereo, living stereo, beautiful recording, beautiful sound. Next, I'm going to go from one of the great, all these are great guitar players. What am I saying? Maybe I should stop saying that. But to me, I can't show a guitar video without talking about Les Paul. It's so amazing and so coincidental that Les Paul, you know, was a guitar player, considering there was a guitar named the Les Paul. Anyway, Les Paul and Mary Ford. Basically, Les Paul invented multi-track recording. Their famous top hit, How High the Moon, with Mary Ford singing. Double, quadruple tracked, great performance. Great innovator. I was lucky enough to see him in the 90s in New York. He played a club regularly there, and I saw him, pretty old, but still friggin' amazing. This is I think this was a record store reissue several years ago of earlier recordings of Les Paul and his trio, and wonderful stuff. Anytime I see a Les Paul record, I'll pick it up. Next, to me, the great one of the great jazz guitarist, gypsy jazz guitarist, Django Reinhardt. Just love this cover. This is an RCA Victor as well. And Django Reinhardt, the Hot Club of France, played in Paris with the great violin player Stefan Grappelli. Love that kind of gypsy music. Love it, love it, love it. Django Reinhardt. As promised, Grant Green. I'm just showing 2 of his records. I think this is my favorite of all his records. Idle Moments, the great Grant Green. And I'm showing this one because of the San Francisco connection. Great cover photograph by photographer Jim Marshall, who I've showcased here on the channel. Corner of Grant and Green, which is the cross street up on Upper Grant in North Beach, San Francisco. So I love this record, but I'd say Idle Moments would be my pick for a Grant Green record. Sticking in the jazz thing, one of the great guitar players, a really different style of jazz, Wes Montgomery. These are recordings, the Carol DeCamp recordings. These were recorded in Indianapolis, I believe, in the 1950s, late 50s. And it's got a great really kind of feel. Piano quartets with guitar, piano, drums, organ trio, Nat Cole style trios. So, I mean, I could name, oh God, I mean, it's that kind of Nat Cole kind of feel. But this, if you got to see videos of him playing, the way he played too. Interesting chord configurations and rhythm configurations. And then an OJC, Original Jazz Classics, of a reissue from Fantasy Records. This one, So Much Guitar. Again, I'm not necessarily showing the absolute best, some of my favorites, and I'm trying to show you a little cross section. Of course, when he was on CTI, he sold a shitload of records. His music got a little more commercial, melodic, wonderful, but you know, he recorded A Day in a Life, like literally weeks, I believe, I think, as I recall, after Sgt. Pepper came out, maybe a month or more. A great version of A Day in the Life, the Beatles record on CTI, produced by Creed Taylor. You know, the CTI sound has a thing to it, but still really good. Okay, now we'll move on to the UK folk thing. This is a cool box. Bert Jans, who, along with John Renbourn, was in Pentangle. This is a first of a series of box sets. I don't have the other ones after this because I have those individual records, but this has the first solo album of Bert, It Don't Bother Me, Jack O'Ryan, and Bert and John, which is a wonderful collaboration with John Renbourn. But these 2 guitar players, the UK folk, British folk scene, somewhat traditional, but a modern version of that, jazz influences. The first Pentangle album is an album, one of the first albums I bought when I first got my first great component system, because it has it's a great sound to it. There's a song on that first Pentangle album called Waltz, which is stunning. Jazzy, great drums, great acoustic guitars, and amazing bass. So loving this. Bert Jans should be in everybody's collection. And then also John Renbourn solo albums. This is Sir John-A-Lot. This was a record when I worked in stores. We sold all the time. We played it in the record store on Reprise Records. Just a beautiful record. Anyway, British folk guitar scene. And of course, in that same group, not a Brit, but a really interesting guitar player who had his own label, started his own label, Tacoma Records, John Fahey. Very unique, had a great different style in his picking and his chords. This has got Requiem for John Hurt, Requiem for Russell Blaine Cooper, When the Catfish is in Bloom, and then side 2 is a variation of Requiem for Molly and Fight On Christians, Fight On. Great, great stuff. His Christmas records on Tacoma is really great, but it's got sort of a plucky sound to it. I didn't show here, but also would probably consider, and I didn't include it in my 21, is Leo Kottke. So, who was on Tacoma for a while, then was on Capitol, several, and is still playing today, several other labels. John Fahey's no longer with us. I'm going in from Molly, an artist who I absolutely adore. I have records of him with Ry Cooder. His solo records is Ali Farrak Touré from Mali. This record, Savan, is one of my favorites of his later period records. This came out in, I believe, in the 90s or early 2000s, produced by Nick Gold, who also worked with Ry Cooder on the Buena Vista Social Club, I believe. But beautiful, beautiful reissue that came out about 2 years ago. Last year it came out. I've had the CD for years, but anything by Ali Farrak Touré and his singing it's just beautiful. Beautiful artist. Savan, Ali Farka Touré. His records I put on all, and just, it's a great mood, a great feel. So, love that. I did a whole showcase on J.J. Cale from Tulsa, Oklahoma. Really unique sound, very introspective, very moody, little folk jazz, kind of finger picking. It's just soothing. It's soulful in a way. I don't want to say it's. Yeah, I do want to say. I can say whatever I want. It's my video. You know J.J. Cale. After he made money with After Midnight, and I'm not including Eric Clapton in this. One of the God guitar players. Eric Clapton is God. But I like Eric Clapton. I'm a little tired of him. Great guitar player, believe me. I'm not taking away from anyone I'm not showing. But I prefer him. And this, J.J. Cale leads me right into Mark Knopfler. I like showing guitars with a really unique sound. And most of these guitar players, in fact all of them to me, to my ears, have a very unique appeal to them. They're not just thrash or rock and roll metal guitarists. Not to take away from a great metal player. You're not going to hear Eddie Van Halen in this list. Sorry, boys and girls. But Mark Knopfler really was influenced by J. Cale. Took it to another level or another direction, and this record just shot out of the speakers when it happened. Of course, anything would shoot out of speakers when you're playing it, but obviously the hit of Sultans of Swing, that guitar playing is just magnificent. You all know it. If you don't, you should, because he's a great guitar player. So, I mean, any of his solo stuff is nice too, but he just got a really kind of good feel on his guitar playing. But again, in my opinion, very influenced by the playing of J.J. Cale. Now, Fleetwood Mac, Peter Green. To me, this is the Fleetwood Mac that matters. I like all Fleetwood Mac, but the early blues stuff, the Peter Green years, with Peter Green and Jeremy Spencer, Mick Fleetwood, it's just an amazing record. This is, and it even says on this version, Peter Green's Fleetwood Mac. What a great guitar player, what a great singer. Not on this album, but later his version of Albatross, one of the great guitar instrumentals of all time. Influenced John Lennon with Sun King. That's a direct influence of Peter Green's playing on Albatross. And then I'll just show this because this is a fabulous record, a solo record that was released in 1979 by Peter Green, called In the Skies. Beautiful record. There's a documentary you should watch. It's available on the streaming services on Peter Green. He went through a lot of brain screw-ups related to drugs and mind-altering experiences, and that messed him up. But what an amazing player. So out of all the British 60s guitar gods and guitar blues players, whether it's Jeff Beck, Eric Clapton, Jimmy Page. I don't even have Jimmy Page on this list. So but I prefer the sound, he can really bring it home, but he can be really subtle in his bluesy, beautiful way. I'm going with Peter Green. Now, a guitar player doesn't get a lot of cred when you see these top 10 lists or 20 lists or 21 lists, is John Cipollina, my favorite of all the San Francisco 60s psychedelic bands. John Cipollina was a member of Quicksilver Messenger Service. And before I continue on with that, I gotta give due to Gary Duncan. Gary Duncan was also a guitar player and did a lot of the leads that you don't know about maybe. Well, look at the videos of Quicksilver performing in the late 60s and early 70s. John Cipollina and Gary Duncan did a lot of back and forth dueling solos. And Gary is just as wonderful as John Cipollina, but John Cipollina had that kind of vibrato thing he played on the SG. Here is a picture of him, close-up of him on the live band he guest with the, I think they're Welsh band, UK, but Welsh, Man's band, Maximum Darkness. This got a lot of airplay in San Francisco on the FM stations. It was only issued as an import. Man band with Deke Leonard, with special guest John Cipollina. And what a wonderful record this is. Live record, but the great John Cipollina with his SG guitar with this kind of twangy sound. On this record, Gold and Silver, and The Fool. Listen to The Fool. Listen to the guitar playing on The Fool, the long 10-minute cut that I believe ends the album, as I recall. Beautiful record, beautiful record. His guitar playing was a big influence on me. Not as a guitar player, because I'm a shitty guitar player, but in terms of music and originality. I think he's one of the most original guitar players around, or he's long gone. He died at a young age of cancer, I believe. And he's my favorite. I mean, I could have mentioned Jorma Kakkonen just for his embryonic journey on Strutistic Pillow alone. I should have mentioned him. I mentioned him, but I'm not showing him. Or Jerry Garcia. I mean, San Francisco had some great guitar players, but he's the only one I included in that. Those of you who watch my channel know my very all-time favorite guitar player is Ry Cooder. This album, I'm showing it to basically to showcase two artists at once. Manuel Galban, Cuban guitar player, worked with the Buena Vista Social Club. Very kind of that sultry, Cuban surf-like electric guitar playing is all over this. This is an amazing, amazing duet album, Ry Cooder and Manuel Galban. He died, I think, in 2011, but this is a gorgeous record. It's got that very Latin feel to it, very sexy record. This came out on Non-Such. This was really rare up until last year when Non-Such released it. So I suggest if you don't have it, grab it, because it won't stay in print long. But it's a gorgeous record. Great guitar playing from two of the greats. Manuel's not known as much in this country, but of course, Ry Cooder is my #1, my favorite guitar player of all time. So if that's ever a trivia question somewhere, you know the answer now. Now, another artist that I don't have any albums of his own, and I don't even know if he made albums on his own, but to me, one of the great guitar players coming out of the 50s or 60s, mostly the 60s and the 70s and beyond, still alive, is the great guitar player James Burton. I first heard of him when he was playing with Elvis Presley. He got known for his famous pink Paisley Telecaster guitar. This is an album, a posthumous album that just came out in the last several years called Way Down in the Jungle Room. Pick this fucker up. It's amazing. Elvis Presley, it's a rehearsals down in the Jungle Room. The Jungle Room was in Graceland. It's basically Elvis's man cave. I know his whole house was probably his man cave, but this is where the bar was, where they jammed around, they played poker down there. And this was a series of recordings, almost like demos, they were working on, and I'm trying to think when this was recorded, 1976. James Burton is all over it, his guitar playing. One of the great, great twangy Telecaster guitar players. But I got into, I saw him several times, but I got to know his name even more from this album, Grievous Angel. One of the songs on here, you hear Graham Parson yell out in the middle of the song, James Burton and his pink Paisley guitar, and great, great sound. All the Telecaster shit on this album is James Burton, all over it. He was on this and GP. And then he was a member of the Hot Band. I saw him at the boarding house, San Francisco, about 1975. He played on the first several Emmylou Harris records. He's all over this record. He was on her first record too. This is her second album, Elite Hotel. But Amarillo, listen to guitar playing on Amarillo. The way he did these fast up guitar players, but even the slower songs, the ballads that Emmylou sings. But James Burton, again, I don't know if he ever did a solo album, but he's all over the place, worked with so many artists on so many albums. Kind of a studio musician, gun for hire, but he's his own guitar player. He's got his great sound, and he's one of those guitar players that plays and makes it look so easy. Now, the one guitar god that we all know in rock and roll that I'm showing is Jimi Hendrix. I cannot do a guitar video without showing Jimi Hendrix, and I'm showing this just so I can show naked women on the VC. This is my original track record version. I got this New Year's Eve the year it came out, and it was behind the counter at the record store in my neighborhood where I picked it up, and the guy asked me if I'm sure I wanted it, and I really didn't. I had snuck it in a brown bag at home, and I never showed it to my parents. But this is Track Records, an original pressing. Yeah, I mean, you all know Electric Ladyland. I think it's, to me, Jimmy's best guitar playing, studio-wise. You know, you could go with any great album of his, but my favorite album is going to be Electric Ladyland by Jimi Hendrix. And what a guitar player. I don't need to say any more. Search out, if you haven't, I did a birthday video on this channel, Jimi Hendrix, where I go to his grave site south of the city of Seattle. He was born in Seattle, and I did a little video tour of it. So seek it out here. The other great American guitar player that inspired so many other guitar players, played on so many albums, is a great studio musician, had his band with his brothers, the Allman Brothers, is Duane Allman. I'm not showing any Allman Brothers records. I'm going to show the two Duane Allman anthology that just shows the magnitude of his playing. B.B. King medley, Hey Jude with Wilson Pickett, Clarence Carter, The Weight, Joe South, Games People Play, Willie Dixon, on a John Hammond record he played on. Worked with Delaney, Bonnie and Friends. You know, I'm a big fan of Delaney and Bonnie and Friends. Layla. I mean, how can you not? I mean, Layla alone, the riff on Layla alone, everyone thinks it's Eric Clapton. It's this guy, Duane Allman. Died way too young, motorcycle accident. Statesboro Blues, one of my favorite pieces of music by him is Boz Scaggs' first album, Loan Me a Dime. The guitar playing on Loan Me a Dime on the Boz Scaggs record on Atlantic Records. You'll need that record. I mean, I almost would include Boz Scaggs. He doesn't get his due as a guitar player, but he's a really kind of a blues guitar player. Didn't include Steve Miller either. You know, I like those guys, but they're not of my favorites as a guitar player. You know, they make great albums on their own, but even though, what is it, Les Paul, I think, is the godfather of Steve Miller, he always tells you. Anyway, next I'm going to go with two other, well, start with one here. Doesn't get a lot of due as a guitar player, but I'm Roger McGuinn, Jim McGuinn, then he changed his name Roger McGuinn, just because of that 12 string alone. He bought the Rickenbacker 12 string because he saw George Harrison play it in A Hard Day's Night. I'm not including George Harrison or John Lennon and Paul McCartney, all great guitar players in their own right, but in my mind, they're not my favorite guitar players. They're my favorite artists and songwriters and as a band. But Roger McGuinn, I mean, just the Mr. Tambourine Man, the 12-string guitar. At least someone like me, I'd never heard anything like that guitar playing. I mean, Rickenbacker gave George Harrison the gift of the 360 12-string Rickenbacker guitar when he was in the hotel sick when he had the flu in New York. He's supposed to go to John Lennon, I hear. But all the rest is history. George Harrison became the 12-string Rick guy, and then he really pushed it further with the Byrds. Great, great sound. I love it. You know, the Folk Den series of CDs that Roger McGuinn put out, I think in the 90s and 2000s are great. They're traditional folk songs that Roger McGuinn plays, and he comes from that folk side of it, and just an amazing artist. Then I'm going to show this because of obviously the jam stuff with Roger McGuinn on his 12-string, but because of Clarence White. I should have pulled out the Clarence White albums that I have with his brother and the bluegrass stuff, but what a great guitar player. On this, the music, the guitar playing on alone on Chestnut Mare is just a beautifully acoustic guitar. Listen to the guitar picking as the song is going on in one of the channels. It's ethereal. He is an amazing guitar player. Him and Gene Parsons, who was the drummer of the Byrds during this period, helped invent the bender, what's it called? The string bender that's on the Telecaster that is now owned by, I know, it just left me. His name left me. The great country twang guitar singer who's making Marty not Marty Robbins, Marty Stewart. Marty Stewart has the original Telecaster that Clarence White played. So Clarence White, amazing artist, amazing guitar player. Clarence White doesn't get enough due, but one of my favorite guitar players, has a beautiful sound on that later, all the Byrds albums from around late 68, 69 to 72, 73 when they split up. And then he unfortunately died loading equipment in the back of his car, got hit by a driver passing by. But Clarence White, an amazing guitar player. And then lastly, just because we should end with Z, Frank Zappa. Y'all know Frank Zappa. I'm just going with this one because, to me, one of the great guitar split-second solos is right after he says, "Great googly moogly," on this cut, on apostrophe, on this album. Don't Eat the Yellow Snow, Nanook Rubs. I mean, side one of this record is a perfect record. So I'm ending this 21 Guitar Players. I think I'm calling it 21 Guitars. Maslow's favorites. Thanks all of you from the UK. Hope we didn't screw up the UK's thing, but you know, there's so many guitar videos and best of guitar, jazz and heavy metal and rock on YouTube. Here's another one. I'm throwing my 2 cents in. Thanks VC, Mazzy loves you. Take care.